Kick back, relax. It's time for the unconventional ufologist.
Hello and welcome to another rip-roaring episode of the Unconventional Ufologist. Today we're going to be looking at the curious case of João Prestes, or when those pesky aliens decide to cook you alive. Anyway, a Tuesday that wasn't. It's times like this I wish I had a voice like Twilight's own Rod Serling. He was able to lean against a wall or stand in a doorway and give a little bit of a story leading up to the main show with his wonderful engaging voice that invariably, or maybe not, it all started with, "Picture this." Anyway, picture this, it's 1976 and a teenage boy has flown the flag in the face of adversity by showing up at school with a book on UFOs. Wishing to carry on his research in school breaks and running the risk of a good kicking by narrow-minded Neanderthals, he was quite surprised when a voice over his shoulder said, "UFOs, eh? Me dad's into that." Anyway, the next day the lad turned up with an issue of Flying Saucer Review that stepped his research up to the next level. And by the way, you probably guessed that teenage boy was me. A very nice chap by the name of Alan Whitehead told his dad of my interest in UFOs, and he sent me a random issue to read. For me, this was the holy grail of British ufology at the time. About 50 pence an issue that at that time I had other things to spend 50 pence on. Founded by ex-RAF pilot Derek Dempster in 1955 and edited up till 1959 by the 8th Earl of Clancarty, Brinsley-le-Port-Trench, and was certainly, under the years under Charles Bowen, was one of the most respected journals regarding the subject of UFOs. But I digress. I couldn't wait to get home to read this. Flying Saucer Review, Volume 19, Number 2, March to April 1973. I began with the foreword where something caught my eye at the end of the paragraph. It said, "We propose to follow the advice of Amy Michelle, to look at everything, study everything, but believe nothing. When we receive reports of seemingly benevolent creatures or agencies, we shall print them accordingly. And when we have reports that point in exactly the opposite direction, we shall print them too." Which is one of the reasons why the account of the death of João Prestes of Araçariguama is included in this issue of Flying Saucer Review. Now that stopped me in my tracks. I'd heard of cattle mutilations, substantiated human mutilations too, but a death reported in such a revered tome such as Flying Saucer Review, wow! Sure enough, in the left column on page 14, the terrible death of João Prestes in Araçariguama by Professor Philippe Carrion. Now you may wonder why the big introduction to this case. Firstly, it gives me an excuse to say a little bit about myself in regards to how long I've been involved with the subject of UFOs. And secondly, to pad things out, as although it's an interesting case, there's not much to say once you've been presented with the facts. In September 1971, during a private interview at the 4th Brazilian Conference on Unidentified Flying Objects between Professor Carrion and Dr. Irineu José da Silveira, the first pieces of an investigation of a case from some 25 years previously began to come together and was presented initially in the French publication Phénomènes Spéciaux in December 1971. So imagine, if you will, a Tuesday, not just any Tuesday mind you, but the kind of Tuesday that starts with fishing and ends up with your skin attempting to vacate your body like a tenant fleeing a burning building. This was the Tuesday that befell João Prestes Filho in February 1946 in a remote Brazilian village called Araçariguama, a place where the concept of roads was more a philosophical debate than a practical reality. João, a sensible man with 5 children, a number that would make even the most enthusiastic rabbit consider its life choices, had spent the day fishing because in Araçariguama electricity was a rumour, telephones were mythical objects, and the local infrastructure was best navigated by goats with a death wish. Now João had made a critical error in judgment, one that would later be filed under things that seemed like a good idea at the time. While the rest of the village was off celebrating Carnival in San Roque, a staggering 7 miles away, which in Araçariguama was considered an intercontinental journey, João had opted for solitude and fish, a reasonable choice until the universe decided to intervene with its signature blend of cosmic indifference and theatrical cruelty. As evening fell, a process that in rural Brazil involves significantly more drama than your average sunset, João packed up his gear, loaded it onto his horse-drawn car and set off for home with his friend Salvador dos Santos. They travelled in near total darkness, accompanied only by the rhythmic clatter of hooves and the occasional existential crisis that comes when realising you're miles from civilization without so much as a torch. After dropping Salvador off, presumably with the Brazilian equivalent of "see you later, alligator," João continued alone, blissfully unaware that the universe had just placed a bet on how quickly it could ruin his evening. João arrived home to find himself locked out, a predicament familiar to anyone who's ever underestimated their spouse's commitment to home security. In 1946 Araçariguama, locksmiths were as common as snowstorms in the Sahara, so João did what any resourceful man would do: he squeezed through an open window. For a brief, glorious moment, all was well. Then, as the universe had suddenly remembered it had left the stove on, everything went spectacularly wrong. João felt that peculiar sensation of being watched, not by a nosy neighbour or a judgmental cat, but by something that made his blood turn colder than a penguin's picnic cooler. He turned towards the window and saw it, a glowing object hovering outside like an overzealous firefly with a grudge. Before he could process whether this was a UFO or someone's idea of a very aggressive porch light, the object shot a beam of light at him. Not the friendly, let me help you find your keys kind of light, but the I'm here to ruin your entire existence variety. The effect was immediate. João felt as though his entire body had been doused in petrol and set ablaze, except, curiously, nothing around him was burning. No smoke, no flames, just the distinct sensation of being slow roasted like a particularly unfortunate Sunday dinner. Faced with this predicament, João did what any rational person would do. He ran, barefoot, through the dark, leaving behind a trail of bloody footprints that would have made a crime scene investigator weep with professional admiration. When he finally collapsed at his sister Maria's doorstep, gasping, "I've been burned," she quickly realised this wasn't your average kitchen accident. João's skin was just red. It was the kind of red that suggests you've just had a close encounter with something that doesn't belong in this world. The local police chief, João Malaquay, a name that sounds like it was invented by a novelist with a flair for the dramatic, arrived to find a man whose flesh was peeling away from his bones like overcooked barbecue. When asked what had happened, João delivered the kind of statement that makes even seasoned law enforcement officers reconsider their career choices. "My attacker had not been from this world." With no ambulances in Araçariguama, a glaring oversight in hindsight, João was transported to the nearest hospital in the back of a truck, a journey that must have felt like being bounced around in a washing machine set to agitate. By the time he arrived, his condition had deteriorated to what the police described as truly ruinous. This isn't a medical term, but it certainly gets the point across. The doctors were baffled. João's symptoms didn't match any known medical condition. His skin wasn't just burned, it was behaving as though it had signed a lease somewhere and was in a hurry to move out. His flesh literally dropped off his body in chunks. His facial features detached like poorly glued decorations, and yet, miraculously, his hair remained intact. Former army medic Araceli Gomide, who cared for João in his final hours, described him as literally decomposing alive. Now let that sink in, not dead and decomposing, but actively falling apart while still technically among the living. João's official cause of death was listed as cardiac collapse due to burns, but this explanation was about as satisfying as describing a hurricane as a bit of wind. First and second degree burns don't typically cause flesh to separate from bone, nor do they result in spontaneous facial feature relocation. So what really killed João Prestes? In the decades that followed, researchers, ufologists and assorted enthusiasts have proposed a variety of explanations for João's bizarre demise. Let's examine them, shall we? Number 1. The UFO enthusiast take. Naturally, the UFO crowd had a field day with this one. João's description of a glowing object and a searing beam of light fits neatly into the alien death ray narrative. Some theories suggest he had been zapped by a UFO's propulsion system, an idea that raises the question, why would advanced extraterrestrials travel light years just to barbecue a random fisherman? Number 2. The ball lightning brigade. Skeptics propose ball lightning, a rare atmospheric phenomenon that involves glowing orbs of electricity. The problem? Ball lightning typically lasts seconds, not long enough to cause João's prolonged suffering. Also, there was no storms that night. Number 3. The folklore fanatics. In Brazilian mythology, there is a creature called the boitatá, a fiery serpent that punishes those who anger it. Some locals believe João had crossed paths with this entity. While this explanation has cultural resonance, it doesn't exactly hold up under scientific scrutiny. Number 4. The radiation hypothesis. Dr. Luis Braga later suggested that João's burns resembled those of Hiroshima survivors. The catch? In 1946, portable radiation weapons were the stuff of science fiction. Also, why test one on a fisherman in rural Brazil? Number 5. That it was probably an accident camp. Then there are those who insist João's death was just a tragic accident, perhaps spontaneous human combustion, a phenomenon science has largely debunked, or a candle fire, despite no evidence of flames in his home. None of these theories fully explain what happened, but the thing about mysteries, they resist neat explanations. Strangely, João's death wasn't an isolated incident. In the years that followed, Araçaguama became a hotspot for bizarre phenomena. Glowing orbs, unexplained burns, and even sightings of humanoid figures were reported. It was as if the universe had marked the village on its map of places to mess with. This pattern of recurring strangeness suggests that whatever happened to João wasn't a one-off event, but part of a larger unresolved mystery. At its core, João's story forces us to confront the limits of human understanding. Science thrives on anomalies, cases that don't fit the established model. João's death is one such anomaly. Was it aliens, a freak natural phenomena, a vengeful mythical serpent? We may never know, but the case reminds us that the universe is far stranger than we often acknowledge. So the next time you're walking home in the dark and see something unusual, take a moment to appreciate the sheer unpredictability of existence and maybe carry a torch, just in case. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Unconventional Ufologist. Apologies to everyone if I've made massive mispronunciations, but I'm not very good at stuff like that, and hope to see you next time. So you take care, and remember, keep watching the skies.